Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Joko. Welcome. Joining us on this, May 13th, 14th, 15th? Okay, 15th. Halfway through the month, plus 1 day. All right. Anyway, welcome. Yes. And we are, I am rather, Youssef, Brother Youssef Doucet, poet, professor, uh, primarily of composition and literature, creative writing, a scholar of cultural studies, Africana studies, and media studies, my research areas. I am joined tonight by my partner and my comrade Tasha. Hi, Tasha.
Hi, Youssef. Hi, throng of viewers that have come to join the conversation or,
That's right.
check us out or troll or whatever you're doing. You're welcome. Welcome to the space. Um, and as we're saying so much these days, comment, talk, leave some comments under these little videos we're making. And, this is Joko Conversations. So, and we, always enjoy our conversations and always aim to contribute something salient, useful, you know, um, thought provoking. And because that's, we need provocation, you know, in this era of the, of that wants to take us out of thinking and reflection and all of these things, and the era of oversimplification and easy answers and religio type solutions to complex problems. We need provocation, right? So um, we always hope to be thought provoking. And all of that being said, we begin in our usual way, um, honoring and bringing into the space our, our personal line, the ancestors who gave us our very bodies, that we get to be here in this moment in time. Um, Transmission of values and life lessons that have us wanting to be uh, workers for justice and a world in which all thrive, um, a world in which our people, the African group, the African family, is uplifted and relieved of our centuries of devastation and destabilization and all of those things. And speaking of that African family, we absolutely honor those folks in the African family some whose names remain on our lips and in our collective memories, some whose names do not live on our lips and in our collective memories. We honor those who have pushed back, have remained creative, remained clever, remained um, vigilant, and have persevered in turning around this era of suppression, repression, oppression, right? Those who press on against the oppressors. Um, Absolutely, we bring them to our forefront, and we acknowledge that anything we do, any of this work that we do with the hospitality of the First Nations people um, of this land, of this Turtle Island, as some of them refer to it. Um, Acknowledging the place that we are in Tongyavar, the unceded territories of the Tongva people, um, at whose ancestors' hospitality we are also uh, coming in that name and in that consciousness, right? That we came as cargo and do not identify with a settler colonial ownership legacy. That is not who we are. We are the Africans,
You are the
children of the
African.
Africans that came. Yes, the children of the Africans that came, um, kept blessedly aware and unified through something called a one drop rule, lest we be
Mm-hmm.
confused by our varying fraternities and
Mm-hmm.
complexions and all these kinds of things that you know in other places uh, have proven to be stumbling blocks. So that's certainly a blessing of this particular experience. And all that being said, great, let's get started with our chat.
Yes, that's your comments remind me of and you've brought this up before, the the several years ago, and it was probably the same event that's coming up, right? The Festival of the Mass in Lemert Park,
Mhm.
Africa Town,
Mhm.
where invited guests, and actually it's very much a joint effort in that way. Um, One of the Azteca dance groups, that performed, and the leader of the group or spokesperson, mentioning, right, the indigenous, encounter with the settler, um, and that, the mistake the settler made of bringing their friends, that is to say, the indigenous friends with them, in the Africans, and indeed our host, as it turns out, and our friends, right, in principled, um, solidarity and unity, right, and including folks who those indigenous folks, who are, are often, identified by the national, I think you might say, name, Mexican, as opposed to, whatever indigenous nation they may actually belong to, uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
Southwest or Mexico.
Mhm.
It's, so anyway, yeah, that's, appreciate that, and folks understanding that, as that the importance of that kind of solidarity, right? In a moment where, we're talking about culture, and notions of shared cultural identity,
Mhm.
and we see, this grand gesture of, white settler solidarity, played out this week with
Yeah.
um, the importation, or, acceptance of the
Yeah.
so-called Afrikaner, or so-called refugees, though nothing,
As
in any definition of, what a
yes.
refugee is, or the conditions that produce refugees, fits none of the definitions, but it doesn't matter, because, they say what it is, and, that's the power they assume, right? To be able to name, and, name reality, and have all of us, live accordingly.
A, an old friend used to call it the Adamic prerogative.
Yeah.
The
Hmm.
prerogative
Yes.
to
The-
name
right. Yes, the prerogative
reality.
to name.
Mhm.
So, it's interestingly enough, right, and I have wondered a little bit during the this week with this particular, gesture, um, troll, and all the various things that it's wanting to do. Um, what some of those folks, and I'm thinking of, white, descendants, or, immigrants, from the white community in, um, Azania, South Africa,
Mhm. Mhm.
who have been, who are more or less mainstreamed in the society, in U.S. society, and I'm not thinking about these, tech billionaires. I'm thinking about folks like, actresses like Charlize Theron, and, there are other folks, right?
Mhm.
Just wonder what their thoughts might be. Just
Mhm.
curious, and even their histories often, right? Because,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, you know, there are all kinds of histories of resistance to the system in people's, politics. And,
Mhm. Mhm.
not everybody in the EFF is black, right? So just, in South Africa.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
anyway, thinking about the culture industries, right? Where, and, there are folks in the culture industries with those ties that I just wonder, right? And or some of the well, anyway,
Mm-hmm.
it and this notion though of a shared sense of Westernness um,
Mm-hmm.
among the settler populations around the world, right? And that shared sense of a common identity, right? Whether they call it white, or it's called white or Western and Western. I do believe, the idea of Western is older than the idea of white. It
Mm-hmm.
in the way it's been, used or what has come to mean in the modern world, besides just a kind of descriptor.
Mm-hmm.
The so I agree with Dr. Cresswell-Seen where she says that Western has become a euphemism for white. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in the post-civil rights era. Um, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a euphemism for white.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and then you can have Afro Latinx Western civilization chauvinists, right? Who lead a kind of militia group because that it's not quote unquote racialized. And
It's not. This is about the West. This
this
isn't
is
about,
about the West, and the West is an idea
yes, and
and an identity.
and an identity. Absolutely. And a pinnacle of civilization. It's,
Hmm.
get with it. Get
And
with
these
it.
culture industries we're talking about
Yeah.
have been critical in the construction of that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
construction of that idea is a kind of common sense
Absolutely.
for the
Mm-hmm.
um, such that though the most progressive or even revolutionary
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
Westerners
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes can't get beyond that, right? Get beyond that idea, and it becomes problematic. And that's you and I both enjoy the work of Gabriel Rockhill
Mm-hmm.
and um, his critiques, and he and others though in the West, right?
Yeah.
Um, of this thing called Western Marxism, right? That
Mm-hmm.
is guilty of reproducing that, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
ways. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah. And that, yeah. Um, and all of that fits. And the importance, I've heard it said in out of some other mouth than mine recently, that
mhm,
the need for a mode of thinking, a way of thinking that is fit to solve
mhm,
modern problems, that is fit
mhm,
for, what I'm saying, and this race paradigm, this white supremacy, this racial supremacy paradigm is not fit. You know, so much of what has the modes of thinking that have brought us to these points have brought world, you know, this kind of world experience. I want to say world class, in terms of,
mhm, mhm,
meaning where class is literally the world of people taken as a whole. Um, that these things that are the common experience, built upon these certain ideologies, these certain ideas, which, um, whose the fruit of which is becoming, highly, what widely criticizable. The you know the 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 problems that are,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
undeniable on so many fronts, such that, in literally in this day and time, um, folk who are still looking to follow the Western model just haven't heard the word, just haven't gotten, the to certain into certain modes of thinking that yes are being generated in the West as part of a continuum in that, you know what I'm saying? In that particular paradigm, at least institutionally, you know. Um, anyway, not to kind of go in too many directions, but um, what I did want to conclude that little uh, rant with is, the this is so much. All of this that we're seeing in the world is so much about a war on ideas.
A war on ideas. Yeah.
Yes. And these very specific, and the war is necessary because the ideas that they're trying to defeat must be defeated if the edifice is going to continue to stand.
Right.
Those are powerful ideas.
Right. Because they are treated like um, viral diseases, right, that have to be stamped, and because there is a virulence, right, that
Yeah.
the way in which an idea uh, travels, right, and um, is
Mm,
gets embedded and resurfaces, right, and at times. So yeah, I love that the way you put that though, a war on ideas. Yeah,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
yes,
Uh,
that's
yeah, first and foremost. But okay, like other things we do in, under the influence of the God complex,
mhm,
um, it won't succeed, though it will be a big, scary spectacle. It's going to cost, you know, as much more of this of what it spends,
mhm,
as it's
mhm,
spending, and so it's going to exact its costs and fail anyway, and ultimately fail. So, you know, and are the how are art's going to take us there, and what has happened in the art, where as we picking up our conversation, what has happened in the arts industries, the common sense making, what have become the common sense making
mhm,
reasons we talked about last week, where people are watching TV and not each other.
mhm,
It
mhm,
is mediation of reality, of a broad and complex reality.
mhm.
And so, teach, Brother Yusuf, what you got to say, what you
Well,
been
I mean,
talking.
so we can start anywhere then. But I was thinking about I still thinking about that period, right? The coming out of the '60s through the '70s, um, and really reaction though, like the popular, the reactionary in popular culture, and how deeply that resonated, right, with particular with the dominant population in this country, and also it's so critical, such a part of the discourse of the society, especially around crime, right? Uh,
Mhm, mhm,
and the deployment of crime and the war on crime as a primary um, a primary practice and discourse of counter insurgency, right? But I'm thinking about so you get this series of films, right? So you mentioned um, the Spook Who Sat by the Door, right?
mhm,
Last week, um, which was barely in the theaters, right? But still had an underground life, did the circuit on the drive-in circuit, right? Um, and then VHS, happened, right? And so was able to live that kind of underground life. And there are other, similar movies. I mean, we could spend the whole night, and I'm not proposing that for tonight, but maybe we should think about, looking at the whole genre of the quote, the blaxploitation film, right? And that's probably even how the spook made its way through a green light, right?
Mm.
I thought it was
Right.
blaxploitation, but some of
Mm.
those so-called blaxploitation films have some interesting
Mhm.
content, depending on who the filmmaker is, often though, right?
Mhm.
But anyway, so at that same time, these series of reactionary films that become like part of the classics, right, and cultural references in the society.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about the Charles Bronson series Death Wish, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Vigilante violence,
Mhm.
going after the dark people
Mhm.
who rape and murder his white wife, or the
Mhm.
the victimized white woman, and he's doing what the police and the courts won't do, right? Because the laws get in the way. And
Adequate. Oh,
and
yeah.
so
Mhm.
popular, they made a Death Wish 2, and there might be so that, right, that series, right, and it's just there are more like it. What's his name? Dirty Harry, right? The Dirty Harry series, and what is the iconic phrase that people still quote? Here we are, what, 50 years later, make my day.
Okay.
And fantasy, right? The fantasy of the destruction of black bodies, criminalized black bodies, right?
Yes.
That fantasy that lives out in that film, that I personally feel people are identifying with through Daniel Penny, right, and his choking
Mhm.
out the young
Mhm.
brother Gordon Neely,
Mhm.
that that they were living out, that he was able to live out, and people have vicariously lived through
Mhm.
him a death wish moment, right? A
Mhm.
dirty Harry moment.
Mhm.
Um, and those types of films, right, deeply ingrained,
Mhm.
in the society, right? They become cultural, touchstones
Mhm.
in the society, and culture heroes, especially Dirty Harry, right? Has
Yes.
become a culture hero. But Charles Bronson as an individual, right? And
Mhm.
for me, I felt the same way, maybe not exactly. No, I'm not going to let me not, you know, hedge my comment. Always
Mhm.
felt that Rocky and the Rocky series. So now we're coming from the 70s into the 80s.
Mhm.
There was a reactionary feel to it, and
Mhm.
that somewhat troubles me to say, because of my awareness of the progressive history of um, of Burgess Meredith, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Mhm. Mm.
and I don't know what he was, if he was in the second movie. I mean, rather the third and the fourth and all that. I can't. Well,
Mhm.
actually, because he was still acting, and again, where it's sort of demonstrating his progressive roots when he was acting in whatchamacallit, the television series Heat of the Night, right, where he plays the judge. And
Mhm.
that TV show is just loaded with liberals and stuff. Well, I don't know that every actor or whatever, but
Right.
Carol
Yeah.
O'Connor,
Famous, right.
right,
Mhm.
and Denise Nicholas. Um,
Mhm.
what's brother man's name that I'm missing right now? Harold, the actor.
I know you're talking about.
Yeah,
Mhm.
who
Mhm.
plays Detective Tibbs, right? And I
Yes. Mhm.
took went blank on his name in the moment. We'll we'll,
Yes.
we'll search it out in a minute, because
Right.
don't Harold Rollins. I knew
Right.
it
Girl,
would come
yes, that's
right.
it. Mhm.
So anyway, um, really interesting, kind of sets of movies in the 70s, right? So there's a lot. There's the reaction, and the reaction that was there from jump, um, is expressed in really popular films. So like we talked about last week, right? So there's a leaning into the sex, drugs, and rock and roll in a particular way. Um, the sexual revolution, but the anxiety around these liberation movements, right, and this rearranging of of the social contract, as it were, and social relations, and even the rising of the global South, and this thing where we continue to confront, right, the birth panic, right, the white birth panic, all this stuff being played out. So the films I've already mentioned, right? The Death Wish, and that they're serial, right? They're so popular they have these sequels.
Mhm.
Death Wish, series, the Dirty Harry films, what becomes the Rocky films. This is also the period when the slasher film emerges.
Yes.
And many of these filmmakers are kind of on the outside, right? They're out, you know. The studios are, again, as there is still this moment of rupture and reorganization, and these guys who are kind of outside, right? So they have outsider kind of rebel, sensibilities, even, but are also kind of freaked out, maybe, right? Some of the changes, right? And so again, it's more anti-establishment than anti-system, so to speak, or
Mhm.
well, anyway.
Yeah, I think
So,
irreverent
yeah,
really captures it because that
irreverence, yeah.
it's so it's like a defiant child, it's
Mhm,
it's the defiant child who went off
mhm,
to protest, and then, the
mhm.
the affluent, defiant.
Right.
It's a for the white boy to place himself in
Mhm,
story that is not, uh not, as you're saying, not anti-system, but
mhm.
in some way anti-traditional or,
Yeah,
you know, irreverent.
right.
It's very interesting. Go ahead, please.
Well, I'm just as you say, so that we got these other, I mean, it's a rich decade, right? The '70s of film, right? Of thinking
Yeah,
about how you were, laying it out last week, sort of like the Western scope, the police scape of shows, etc. And
yeah,
I'm just thinking about those films, because what other films are coming out, and I think the same year as Death Wish, right?
mm,
The Godfather,
yes. Mhm,
and then the Godfather sequence, right? And is the
mhm,
Godfather a reactionary movie? I had never thought of it that way. I mean, there's that sense of it, the story of a journey into Americanness, right?
mhm,
Um, and that becomes, I think, even more explicit in Godfather 2,
mhm,
where
mhm,
early in the film, where the Nevada senator is meeting with Corleone,
mhm,
and maybe even even before the meeting, right? Michael Corleone is telling his people, hey, make sure this is like this is that, because they think we're all like barefoot peasants and etc.
mhm,
Something.
mhm, mhm,
Um, so that path, right? That we know the books are out there, right? How the Jews became white and how the Irish became white.
mhm.
There might be one how the
Yeah,
Italians became white, right?
I'm sure. In fact,
All
yeah.
that's being right.
Yeah, there's quite a bit. It's a popular conversation now,
Yeah,
and a few people of Italian descent have some channels, where they
yeah,
deal with that history,
with that history.
and deal
And
with.
the film and maybe the novel, right? And I've only read parts of the novel, but never read it all the way through. Is dealing with that, right? That process in the mid 20th century, and looking at it in the mid 20th century. The And also thinking about Cabaret, which I
Mm,
would not call a reactionary movie, right? But just the opposite, right? Just warning, right, about the moment. And oh, what is it? It's based on the diaries of, is it Christopher Isherwood? I think.
Oh, is
Uh,
it?
yeah, I believe so. Yeah, Cabaret is based on the diaries of Chris. I believe I'm right, and I can be, or we can
Oh,
look it up, but I think so. Yeah.
I didn't know.
Um, but again, it's confronting fascism, right? Or
Yeah.
showing the face of fascism.
Yeah.
I've never seen the live show, right? The live musical stage show.
Mhm,
Have
mhm.
you?
No, no, I've only seen, uh
The film,
well, I've
right?
never seen yeah, I've only seen the film. I've never
The
seen
Liza Minnelli film. Yeah,
yeah.
and I'm wondering, and of course, speaking of which, right? Here's a musical, and I don't like musicals, although it doesn't seem like a musical, right?
Yeah,
Um,
'cause you're in the cabaret, I
Computer
mean
don't like musicals. Um,
yeah.
but now to see it on stage, a play directly confronting fascism and the rise of fascism, right? That moment when fascism is coming to power, and clamping down on the arts, etc. Um, what would it cost to get a ticket? Right, it's probably going to cost $100 to go see the play. So who can see it, right? Um, and even movies now in the theater are becoming so expensive. The
Mhm,
so
mhm.
anyway, just thinking about and where's the hope? Um, Often in the space films, right?
Yes,
But the Star Wars series starts in the mid late 70s, mid becoming late 70s, and a story of resistance, right? To and the Empire, right? The Galactic Empire is modeled on the Nazi Empire, right? I mean, it's so clear with the helmets and everything.
right.
The
Mhm.
And even what's that? What is it? What was it? Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Is
Mhm.
he has a message of hope, right? The hope is in the
Mm,
stars, and it seems that time, right, that folks are looking for a new mythology in some ways.
right. Absolutely, and are receptive and open to other
Mhm,
mythologies and are,
mhm,
able to, are actively incorporating and embodying other mythologies. Of course,
mhm,
the well-known popularity of certain certain set of practices and doctrines that came through certain parts of India, to be,
right,
really, really specific and really, really, because there's a whole, there's a whole class, race, apologetic
mhm,
comes with that, and yet it
mhm,
is, for a structure that is so rigid and Protestant and all, these kinds of things.
right,
Scores of people opening the door to these practices and and that opens the door to let's look here, let's look there. And then also,
mhm,
you know, whereas Africa is invisibilized in the same from that of the so-called, Orient,
mhm,
and who that
right,
so came as the I guess as the Asian becomes the model minority, the wisdom teachings of the place,
mhm,
the home countries of the Asians become idyllic and
mhm, mhm,
just enduringly, and that's also an iconography that happens in
yeah,
this
yeah,
things like what did I used to watch all the time as a kid? What did I love? It was Kwai Chain and the what was the name
yeah.
of that movie?
What was it?
You
Kung
know,
Fu.
Kung
Yeah,
Fu.
yeah,
That's it. And that says it all, right? And that says it all, right?
yeah,
And
like,
those kinds of
yeah,
things. And then you have that counter to get this blend with the Billy Jackson, the Chuck Norrises, which is
yeah.
how
All the
particularly
way up to what's his name? Seagal, right?
right,
All the way
right
up to Seagal.
later. And then you have another variety which has such longevity, the Karate Kid,
Yeah, which
series,
is
and
that.
absolutely, and it's been back for a while, and now they're taking it back to the theater, because it's done
Mhm,
so well streaming.
Mhm.
It's done
That's
so well.
right. That's right. The Cobra Kai series did well.
Absolutely, did
They
great.
did the one with what's his name, Jaden Smith.
Yes,
They did a
yes, they all
version,
did well. Yes.
and then the one with the young woman, right, is
Mhm. As the protege.
the protege. Yes, the
Yes,
apprentice. I was going to say,
the
the
apprentice.
or whatever, right? The learner.
And it's
And
also
yeah,
interesting, right? Because it's all that repetition. As I've you stated in a certain way. I'm not going to be able to recall it precisely, but in terms of the this very particularly American story, kind of story, um, where uh, that happens during this time of the uh, you know mixed race, you know, Asian and white, heroic character of the master of this particular set of arts, and or the with the Karate Kid series, certainly the apprenticing of the non you were talking kung fu, the non-Chinese, the
right.
non-Chinese, that all of this having to remove these cultural products from the parent culture, you know what I
Yeah,
mean, or for it to be a story that can be palatable, that can be told, that can
right.
be relevant. Just like if we're going to have if we're going to love Sidney Poitier, then he's or any of these black key actors, and they are removed. We must tell the story of their removal of from the broader community, because we can't, and all these kind
Hmm.
of very, very, very particular, very, very particular, uh,
Hmm.
presenting um, these kinds of things and these kinds of co-ops. Whereas, of course, if you're looking at other world religions like Ifa Congo religions and all of the other collection of West African traditions and uh, Central West African traditions that came in with the people, um, Islam, the suppressed, the non-recognized, but practiced and engaged. People are actually practicing, engaging it from uh, definitely from mainstream communities,
Hmm.
mainstream communities. So that's an interesting dynamic to me in terms of like kind of the lived reality and the condensing or the compressing of the legacy of the martial arts film. Ultimately is one of these vengeance tropes, one of you know these kinds of what I mean, where you have the he's coming, he's gonna kick butt, the heroic character kicking butt and getting rid of,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
Um, anyway,
Yeah,
anyway,
well, there was a pattern for a while there, particularly in the '80s, right? And Ralph Macchio was in a couple of those, right? The Karate Kid, but the elder of color, right, of some particular skill or something, doing just what you said, right, passing that on to a white youth rather than a member of his or her own community,
mhm,
um, whatever. Right?
mhm,
Again, I mean, that's clearly the case in Karate Kid, right? The original Karate Kid. I believe what is the movie Crossroads?
that's exactly what I
Again,
was thinking about.
with
The blue,
Ralph Macchio, and it's the blue,
yeah.
right, being passed on. Even something silly movie from the '80s. What was it? Sheena. If I, where the with what's her name? I just went blank on the sister who played Uhura on Star Trek.
Yes,
Michelle, right?
yes,
Michelle, um,
you're good.
Nichols. I can't.
That's
Anyway,
it.
Michelle.
That's it.
Uh, plays
Yeah,
the elder though, right? Who is
right.
schooling. Even in Conan, right? Conan the Barbarian, right? And it's
Mm,
what Mako, right?
mm,
Mako is the wizard, right? Who schools, it becomes a spiritual guide, right, for the Conan character, right? If not taking him as a child, right? And but anyway, there's still that kind of relationship, and it's what that particularly U.S. iteration, one of the U.S. iterations of the
mhm,
Orientalism
mhm,
that Edward Said talks about, the way in which the Orient is
mhm,
um, an imaginary of this thing that also imagines itself as the West, right? And
mm,
of course, Orient is a word meaning East, right? And of course, we even get our to be oriented, right? Is all that sense of direction. Um, but just that, right? These tropes about Asia, Western Asia, Central Asia, Southwest Asia, North Africa, instead of the South, becomes somehow the Orient, also the East. Even as far west as Morocco, right, is somehow the East, right? Especially under the Ottomans, right, or whatever, right? It's
right.
um, as opposed to under the Romans when it gets to be the West, right? Or
Mhm,
the all the idea, the various ideas about India and even about East Africa. So again, the South
mhm,
doesn't
mhm,
exist, as a place worthy of note.
mhm,
That it's also
mhm.
um, folded into
Yes.
the Orient, right? And these kinds, basically fantasies, right? Is about these places and who these people are. At a time, though, with consider U.S. involvement in Asia. Certainly starting with the Philippines, but actually, what in the 1850s, there's at least the U.S. military is encountering, or the U.S. Navy is encountering Japan in one way or another, right? Participating in the conquest of the Pacific in one way or another, trying to get its peace. Um, Participating in the Boxer Rebellion in China in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. So these ideas are coming in, just like they're coming into England, right, from India, from Hong Kong, from other places. Like they're
Mhm,
coming into the Netherlands, right? Like they're coming into France from Vietnam and Cambodia and all these places, and coming
mhm,
into Portugal from India,
mhm,
etc. Right? From East Africa, from North Africa, the and so these exotic notions, right? What's his name? I
mhm,
think it might be, if I remember correctly, and I might not be remember. There may be an older version. Maybe is what I. Yeah, there is an older French version.
mhm,
And I'm thinking of the Thousand and One Nights, right? The Tales of the Thousand and One Nights,
mhm,
um, commonly in English called the Arabian Nights, right? That come into um, I think a French translation maybe in the 1700s, perhaps the
mhm,
1600s.
mhm,
But English translation, I think, in the 19th century by Richard Burton, right? One of the, colonizers, famous for his search for the source of the Nile. Um, I think he's the one, right, who maybe translates the first English version, and calls it the Arabian Nights instead of the Thousand and One Nights.
mhm.
And it's already, this kind of form of Orientalism, right, through his translation and what people think of the exotic East. Um, and academics writing about these places in that same tone, right, the exotic. And so just, new iterations of that, right? From everything from bath bead commercials,
Mm.
right? That you put in your tub, right?
Mhm.
I don't think it was the cow. It was. I don't think it was the Calgon. Maybe it was
Calgon,
Calgon. Not Calgon,
okay.
take me away. But
Yeah.
ancient Chinese secret, you
Oh,
know,
right.
whatever the company was, right? So,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
everything from there to what
Right.
you know this
Right.
series of martial artists. It's interesting too. You mentioned Chuck Norris. I know for so growing up a black kid in L.A., among other black kids in L.A., and for us boys, uh, Bruce Lee meant a lot as someone Chinese, as folks used to Asian people, being in and around the neighborhood. And I don't mean just as merchants, right? But, people who live in
Right.
the neighborhood or whatever, right?
Right.
Not unused to other people of color, right?
Right.
Um, and seeing Bruce Lee as much as a hero to black folks, as a non-white hero, right?
Yes.
Kato, when he was on the Green Hornet, known to have a friendship with Lou Alcindor, who becomes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was a hero to us. Um, and I remember when Chuck Norris comes on the scene, and even the fight with Chuck Norris in the film that takes place in Rome. I can't remember what it is. Not Enter the Dragon, but one of the later, maybe even his last film. I can't remember the title. But it's like, who is this dude?
Mm.
Who's this white boy?
Um,
And who said he's now, once Bruce Lee is gone, who says he's supposed to be the toughest, whatever, right?
mhm.
Somehow there was this sort of anointing of Chuck Norris. Was like, wait a minute, who said Chuck Norris?
Mhm.
I mean, not even Jim Kelly. I mean, you just go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, this is for a lot of people, and for a lot of us, right? And those of us who watched the Saturday afternoon, kung fu movies,
Absolutely.
which were awesome, right? Coming from
Yes.
Hong Kong, but not introduced to Jackie Chan yet. Um,
Yes.
I don't know when Jackie Chan begins making his films, or the other Sammo Hung, right? And, uh, and I'm just guessing. I think their careers really get started in like the 80s, though. So it felt like an imposition, and it felt like that, right? That
Mhm.
uh, somebody was declaring the torch passed from the indigenous home of the arts, so to speak, to this
Mhm.
white person, not just any white person, but an American, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and you started getting films in the 80s like American Ninja, right?
Mhm.
And what
Hmm.
so yeah, that
Yeah.
and these black characters, these Latino characters,
Yeah.
are Asian characters from passing on their knowledge, just as you mentioned, right, to a young white person,
Mhm.
often, right? Or it's about the young, or, somehow being a vehicle for the young white person's development. But that's a comfortable role, right? That for the general audience, the white audience in the U.S., um, unthreatening older people of color. Um,
Mhm.
what's the word? I'm facilitating the maturation of a young white person,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
rather than
Mhm.
their own, community members who
Mhm.
might even be absent in the film,
Absolutely, and usually
you
are,
know,
right?
and usually are,
Mhm.
or in some kind of tension, right, with the character, don't want to listen. And this trope continues, right? It comes all the way up into the 2000s. I mean, I feel like the same thing is happening in what is that movie with Samuel L. Jackson, Black Snake Moan.
I
Um,
don't think I ever finished it. Yeah. Okay, go
but the
ahead.
same thing is going on, though, right?
Okay. Mhm.
And he, and they're really saving two young white people, right?
Uh-huh.
from that film. So that's both part of the.
Yeah.
So there's both. Again, it's the reaction and the reform, right?
So
At play.
and it's also the enduring, yes, absolutely. And the relationship that endures, because the
Yeah.
in terms of like the reaction and the reform, the trope is fundamentally reactionary in that it I was about to say reproduces the essentially the beloved servant
Yep.
who is
Yes.
facilitating the maturation of the children. These are essentially
Exactly.
mammies and uncles, be they
Exactly.
African, be they Asian, be they
But
Chinese, be
be
they
they
Indian.
Chinese?
They are
Exactly.
right. They are house servants, who have these, who have no
Yes.
doubt similar roles, though right? We're very clear about that mammy relationship in terms of our ancestry, in terms of and those memories that were preserved. But surely
Mhm.
this becomes the role of the Chinese nanny. This becomes the role
Mhm.
of, if
Mhm.
depending on where you are and who is the,
Mhm.
the mainly enslaved group, using the terms enslavement broadly.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, so the reaction, and the reform in this kind of what is it? This kind of hollow honoring, you know,
Right.
through this placement, or a hollow kind of honor of the, because part of that hollow honor of the martial arts is that in order for it to be digested, it has to be removed from its cultural
Right.
context. You can't look at it in context. You can't look at any of these people in context, because that brings down the whole house of cards. Brings down the whole house of
Right.
cards.
Yeah, it down the whole house of cards.
It's
Exactly.
supposed to be like, poop is an ancient Asian secret, and poop, poop. And
Mhm.
but on the other hand, you still want to suppress and repress and reject traditional Chinese medicine until you
Right.
simply cannot
Right.
but give it space. You know what I'm saying? Give it
Mhm.
space uh, uh, in your resourced
Mhm.
in the spaces of resource in the resource institutions. You ultimately have to, because there is a push, you know, from
Mhm.
right
And that
classes,
might depend where, right? Because that
not
like
everywhere, right?
what state,
Exactly,
and
exactly,
it is right in this
exactly.
country anyway. Right. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's, so that connection isn't, and or, all of the, Aztec healing clay and all of these ancient,
Mhm.
and if
Exactly, exactly, and
it,
again, at that same time, right, there was
yeah,
um, as you've mentioned Billy Jack a couple of times, right, and certainly, this notion of the wisdom of the Native American, and again, that
yeah,
that this kind of romanticized idea of
yes.
the First Nations
Woo.
of this country, um, without certainly a kind of generalized or generalizing, maybe is what I'm trying to say, of of what a Native American is, right? Or you know typically often limited to the ideas familiar from Hollywood movies, right? And um,
Absolutely,
primarily, the nations of the plains,
yes,
or
yes.
maybe some familiarity with like the DNA Hopi of the Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
You think
Mm-hmm.
of the popularity of places like Sedona, in New Mexico, and Taos, New Mexico, and
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
but again, often quite shallow, right? It's very often
Mm-hmm.
it's very shallow response. and whose traditions, though, as you mentioned, right, absorbed in many ways. Um, the spiritual practices or the popularity of African spiritual paths,
Mm-hmm.
uh, whether they come under the name of
Mm-hmm.
Santeria, in the Americas, or Vodun in the
Mm-hmm.
Americas, or Hoodoo,
Mm-hmm.
in the Americas, and particularly North America.
Mm-hmm.
So again, people, yeah, they're people reproduce it and follow it, but it doesn't get that kind of privilege of the
Mm-hmm.
trend, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think of the Pacific Islander, right, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe only of late, right? Some of the secrets of the Polynesians are coming to people, right? And the uses of tarot and whatnot, and but
Right.
only lately, really, which is interesting to me because of the presence of colonizers in the Pacific. Again, at least since the mid 19th century, and certainly U.S. Occupation of the Philippines as its gateway to the West, or rather, to the Pacific from that side, and um, its capture of the Hawaiian Islands, right? And but so what is the ideological need to suppress some cultures' contributions, um, at least discursively,
Mm-hmm.
um, and elevate others?
Mm-hmm.
Asia fits into the model, though, of
Mm-hmm.
the being in the theater of the world historical, right?
Right.
um,
Right.
and yeah, being in the theater of the world historical, and so Asia is somehow privileged
Mm-hmm.
by that, and also North Africa, without
Mm-hmm.
ever hardly mentioning that it's Africa and
Mm-hmm.
Africa is involved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, uh, all this stuff, right? Because we're talking about the culture industries, right? And all of these ideological points get played out
Mm-hmm.
through the culture industries.
Mm-hmm.
This area of mass mediation, um, and what can get through, right? At a given moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for the to the American public in particular,
Mm-hmm.
because all it's one of the US's biggest exports is its visual,
Right.
is its popular culture, right? I don't just say visual, right? Is
Right.
its popular culture.
Right.
Um, but television and movies being probably chief among those. I mean, I don't know, maybe I can say that because music is so widespread, and
Mm-hmm.
we can see the influence of it, and
Mm-hmm.
um, certainly film and television
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the primary target of its propaganda is its own population,
Right.
right? Um, and again, anything. So
Ugh.
something something revolutionary doesn't get greenlit. If Yeah, things revolutionary don't get greenlit, which
Think-
doesn't mean people can't take revolutionary lessons from what does get greenlit.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm missing I'm skipping over a whole genre of like political films from the 70s that
Mm-hmm.
were mostly, though, kind of downers, right? That they don't really point to um, a possibility for a better outcome, so to speak. So often, they end up being about the overwhelming power of the state,
Mm-hmm.
and its
And
backers.
and probably the utopian, nice but utopian, probably a message of nice but utopian. But mention some of those political films.
Well, I'm thinking of things like 3 Days of the Condor,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really good film. I think really good film, real fun. Robert Redford, about and in some ways is illuminating, right, about how people work for the CIA, as he and his team. They're like CIA analysts, right? They aren't spies, right? They aren't
Yeah,
assassins, anything like that.
yeah.
And in truth, um, the CIA is primarily a misinformation outfit. Um, but anyway, they come across a piece of information that they shouldn't, and so they're being picked off. And the character comes to the realization of just how underhanded and um, wicked, right? Or just the chaos agents, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the CIA is.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no there's no taking down the CIA, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, if this thing you found becomes news tomorrow, okay, great, and then the news cycle will change, and
So it's inevitability.
right,
The
right.
inevitability. Mm-hmm.
The film, and again, Robert Redford, right? The Candidate, which I think is a wonderful film. I really like that movie, The Candidate. As
Mm-hmm.
it takes it's 1970s, right? It's taking a look into what it takes to get elected, so to speak, right? And
Mm-hmm.
um, the horse race, right? And but then what, right? Once you're elected, then what? Um, they came back to that film, right? They revisited that film recently, with Robert Redford as that character, now a senator who's been in Congress for decades, right? Um, I didn't see the follow up. I actually just remembered it, and I do want to see it, to see what
Mm-hmm.
they do with it. But it doesn't offer anything, right? It is a really great insight into sort of the game of politics played in America, in
Mm-hmm.
the 1970s, which is only intensified, right? And even some of the stuff has become straight up legal with what is it, Citizens United, just in terms of the
Yes.
bribery and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it doesn't offer anything, right? And one
Right.
more, let me give you one more title,
Right.
The Parallax View.
I've heard
Um,
that title.
yeah,
You know,
what's
ring.
his name? Beatty, Warren Beatty,
Mm-hmm.
journalist, right? Tracking down some nefarious deeds. But so
Yeah.
those are a couple of titles that again, they're making a political point, but they aren't offering a vision beyond.
And it may even fit into a genre, a time specific genre, in that still it remains, and I think it remains, and maybe that morphs into um a look at the evils of the corporation,
Mhm,
films that were about,
mhm.
were based on
Yeah,
actual,
yeah,
kind of issues and incidents,
yeah.
but exposing the evil of the corporation, uh,
Mhm,
that look at the government, you could see as a kind of capture and commodification of that sensibility as something, to capture and contain that spirit of the actual spirit of resistance, the actual
mhm,
of analysis. So it's like, okay,
mhm.
let's play this, let's play that, and here is the confines in which we will be able to imagine that and play
Right,
that and
right.
feel on some extent, because this, we are naming the system as a bad actor, right? But as you say, nonetheless, something with an inevitable, the outcome is inevitable. There's just not, uh and it's objectionable and it's terrible, but unfortunately, kids,
Right.
That's good.
or to do
Very-
something about it to the degree necessary makes you as bad as them.
Makes you as bad as them. Aren't you doing the
Same
same?
thing too. So
Or
that
will
moralism,
I be
right?
mad?
There's a
Yeah.
moralism
Yes.
often
Yeah.
attached to some of those films, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Some of that genre.
But certainly
But
daily fodder, the daily,
yeah,
our daily bread. Yeah.
let's
Hmm.
stick with the '70s for a minute,
Yes.
or at least late '60s, and I'm thinking 68, '69 at the
I was
earliest,
born.
right? Into the '70s, and some of
Yes.
the horror movies, right? And not the slasher movies,
I was,
the
yes, I
horror
was
movies.
talk about horror. Yeah. Go on. No, no, I'm not saying
Well,
I
I'm
want
just wondering, but what do you think? Because I'm thinking particularly of two titles.
to.
There are
Mm-hmm.
more we can add, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking specifically of Rosemary's Baby
Mm-hmm.
and The Exorcist
Mm-hmm.
in this
Mm-hmm.
period, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this move to this move to the supernatural,
Mm-hmm.
right? And particularly the supernatural, where
Mm-hmm.
the power of evil, right, is central, right,
Mm-hmm.
and even its possible triumph, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Rosemary's Baby, um,
Mm-hmm.
and even to some degree, The Exorcist, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As the exorcism is not properly effected, right, by the end of the film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, very, very interesting storyline that in terms of the move, the having the Africa connection, the whole,
Mhm,
having to go into the
mhm. The Exorcist.
world
Mhm,
kind of a thing with the exorcist
mhm,
that takes you to Africa and the Middle East and takes you
mhm, mhm.
what into these nefarious places, like in these, these other places that are
The
part of
home
that.
of demons.
Thank you. Into the demonic dimensions, right?
Mhm.
What I was gonna say, I'm just gonna insert it because I really want to hear this kind of elaboration about um uh the bringing in that religio super
Mhm.
that kind of element, but just in terms of the horror genre, and I'm thinking of it inclusively from that slasher thing, just the production of horror and fear, just a constant generation of tension and anxiety and paranoia, just
Mhm.
constant message of.
Mhm.
Then it became child molestation, and or child murder, and I mean, all these kinds. Never mind the I'm jumping way ahead, but what was it, the Criminal Minds series, and the fact, you know what I mean, the adoration and the uh the putting up on the pedestal, right, the exalting of the
Of the
serial.
serial killer. Yeah.
Yeah. The single, and who is a white male figure. It's such an interesting
Yeah.
psychology,
Yeah.
but all of this feeding a fundamental fear and anxiety,
Mhm. Mhm.
social energy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But please continue.
Well,
Exorcism.
I'm curious. I'm just thinking about what is the political what's being expressed there, right? What's the anxiety, right, being expressed? Or again, right, a turn to the supernatural, right? A turn to the mystical as a way to not turn to the material, right? The um, so both a
Hmm.
what's the word I'm looking for? Both an expression of the fear, the anxiety, right? And the anxiety generated by an evil that is unearthly, right?
Yes.
And that,
Yes.
which again is this, is this the a deep seated kind of response to what's happening in the world, right?
Mhm,
This is still we're coming to the end of the Vietnam War, or it's at the height of
mhm,
the Vietnam War, right? 68,
mhm.
69. The the global South generally, right? Since 1949, 1948, 1949, is on a path of liberation, right?
Mhm.
And we know there's a um, that is stunted, right, through this decolonization process that maintains it maintains the international structure, right, through various types of reform, but that doesn't ultimately challenge, right, the international order, the international law, right, internet the boundaries created by empire and all this, the banking system, right, the creation of these control measures, the World Bank and the IMF, right, the um, nonetheless, the white world sees its natives, its slaves, its colonies in uproar everywhere,
You're right.
demanding independence or demanding full equality and civil rights, right? And
Yeah.
that's certainly anxiety producing. And folks, have that, indeed are the evangelicals and their cohorts in other places like South
Yeah.
Africa,
Yes.
see these as demonic, right?
Yes.
Demonic
Yes.
moves, demonic changes. And so
Yeah.
maybe that's, part of what's being expressed unconsciously, subconsciously in the novels, right? Because again, The Exorcist is a novel before it's a
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
Is Rosemary's Baby also, or a story? Um,
I don't know.
um,
Mm.
and
Mm.
this talk, this concern with the end times, as it's coming to the end of the empire.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I was gonna say of also things like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and whatnot, and the here comes the devil, capital T, capital D, if you happen to
Mhm,
be part of a tradition that has such
mhm,
an entity. You know what I mean? Um, that there is a because it's in this it's a it's a it's in a very what it's a final frontier kind of a space, you know what I
okay.
mean? It's a and fear is fascinating. You know what I'm saying? In that it literally kind of locks you in to a, you know what I
Transfixes.
mean?
Yeah.
Thank you, that's the word, transfixes, so, um, not everybody likes horror films, it's not even a matter of liking, it's, akin to the, uh, can't look away, you see an accident,
You
there's a
can't look
horrible
away.
accident, you
Exactly.
can't look away, so there is a, and some people have related that to the, value of fear as a warning signal for survival
Mhm,
and
mhm,
how important it is to be
mhm,
able to, you know, have
mhm,
harm,
mhm,
go off. So, I mean, I think that it perhaps inadvertently, um, served as a because there's a those were two major films, but it was such an era for that film,
mhm, mhm.
kind of film, and indoors,
Yeah.
certainly indoors, and
Each of them really kick off, you know, the copycats, right? The
yeah,
possession or the devil, is coming,
and
bird.
all the yes, and all of this, the based on a true story tagline,
Yeah.
that heightens that
Yeah.
taking it to, to these realms, as you're saying, out of the material. What about the, the evil that that man
Right.
wreaks without under no influence, in full conscious
Right. Exactly.
material, having no trance, no, nothing is going on. It's just choice, it's just greed, it's
It's
just
just greed.
brutality, it's
Exactly. These are the acts of humans,
these are the act
not
of
humans.
humans,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
And something totally manageable, totally manageable.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
Rosemary's Baby is one of my favorite films, one of my favorite
Hmm.
films of all times, and also that sense of creepiness and conspiracy. Uh,
Hmm.
Rosemary's Baby, uh,
Hmm.
as this conspiracy, this the invisible conspiracy, the invisibilized conspiracy,
Hmm.
and you're actually surrounded by
Yeah,
conspirators of that
exactly.
element,
And we want to give props to the film of the skill of the filmmaker, right? To
Oh,
get
yeah.
that effect, right? Polanski, right? Roman Polanski.
The characters were just great. I mean, I thought it was a great film.
Performances,
And then
the great Ruth Gordon, right? Just
great
fantastic in
for
that
it.
film.
Yes,
Just,
absolutely. That
she was the
character,
best.
ah,
She was she's the most memorable character to me always.
and the way they were so banal, it was really
Hmm.
interesting, those characters. They taking them out
Hmm.
of any kind of glamorized kind of, you know what I mean, stylized. These were just,
Hmm.
people living in New York, and they just happened to,
Yeah, in an old,
in an old,
brownstone apartment or whatever, right?
brownstone,
Yeah,
and they,
there's nothing,
well,
right. There's a nice grittiness to
I
it,
bought
right?
you a nice pudding. You want some pudding? Don't reject the pudding. Come on, have some
Yeah.
pudding. Kind of a thing. But yeah, the right before your eyes. Again, also the fear of the neighbor. Um, and these also you have during also, it also addresses, I think those films also address and right shift the population's religious explorations, and also a specific development of exploration in the occult, which is by no means
Mhm,
new in the 70s. You know what I'm
mhm.
saying? But some really deliberate kinds of extensions into Wicca,
Yeah,
deliberate kinds of, a concretizing of a doctrine of Satanism, which has nothing to do with
yeah,
religious work. You know what I'm saying? Literally nothing to do. Anton LaVey aside, the dramatic whatever he was about. You know what I'm saying? But a uh there is something there to be uh, uh, made fearful. You know what I'm
mhm,
saying? And those things I think are still very, very readily evoked. They're very readily
mhm.
evoked. A
So
uh,
there are two other things, or two other series from that era
mm-hmm,
leading into the 80s, that
mm-hmm,
pick up on those things, right? The Omen series,
mm-hmm,
right? The Omen series with Damien.
mm-hmm.
And what the last one, which, as the language you used, right? The last one is the final conflict, right? um, in the original, because they did come back. They did do some sequels again anyway, but that original trilogy, right, with the final conflict. So on that same trope as Rosemary's Baby, right, the birth of the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and these other films that became popular at the time, not slashers yet, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Wolfen, right? These versions of the werewolf movie
Werewolf.
that come back,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
again, that kind of hidden in plain sight, or you too could be affected, even if you are,
Yeah.
young, smart, great career, newswoman, right? And
Right.
you too might be, so again, what is that, right? What
Right.
ideas is that standing in for, right? This kind of infection that will turn you into, a rabid beast or a
Yeah.
revolutionary, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so just
Mm-hmm.
putting those in there, right? So, that
Hmm.
starting with Rosemary's Baby, the birth of the Antichrist, or at
Hmm.
least the birth of the Antichrist, the possession films, and the various possession films that follow The Exorcist, and The Exorcist ends up having a sequel. Um,
Hmm.
and then they come back to it with prequels, right? In recent years, the
Hmm.
in mid 70s, though, right? Mid 70s. And then these Omen films, right? The first one appearing in 76. Again, in all the various
Hmm.
takes on these genres, right? The
Yes.
What's the one I'm thinking of? Oh, the black possession film, maybe with Mary Alice, Abby. You
Oh,
remember Abby? And it's interesting. Thalmas Rasulullah maybe is in it. I got it. Oh, I
oh,
forgot. How can I skip over thinking of black horror films? You can't leave
Blackula.
Black unmentioned, right? Black
Blackula.
but
Bride of Blackula.
Abby, right? And Abby, is quite interesting. It's an archaeological dig in West Africa somewhere, and a statuette of Eshu Elegba is
Oh,
dug,
wow.
and it holds the spirit, right? And it's a statue with an erect penis,
Right.
and
Ah,
somehow, and it's
well,
brought back, and somehow Abby is possessed, right, by Legba, but Legba is demonic,
yeah,
and of course she acts out sexually.
right,
Abby, yeah,
right.
and Abby reacts the way, say, a vampire might, or a demon, when in a Christian church, right? An attack comes on in a Christian church, and she's got to get out of there, right?
Right.
It's but it was post um, Exorcist, right? A possession film, right? These possession films,
Yeah. Yeah.
specifically for Black audiences. Abby,
Yeah.
um,
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
and the
And
demon was, now we
except
know, an Orisha, right? But demonized in this film.
precisely, I was going to say the same thing of the the notion of possession, the
Yeah,
varying notion of possession. You know what I'm
very
saying?
notion.
So put in a black context, but in a kind of color me brown kind of way, because nothing really
Mhm.
at all with African spirituality. It actually has to
And
do
possession,
with
right?
it's a reproduction of the literal demonization of African spirituality.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yes, and actually is a what a admonition to the black consumer who's enjoying the black faces and even
Mhm.
enjoying the trip to Africa and the art, enjoying all of that,
Right.
but the spirituality is absolutely
In
not
in
represented,
a
and it's
moment when
still the Christian
the
spirituality.
diaspora is reconnecting with its African traditions. It's in that moment, right?
Right, right,
That it comes out, right?
right. How interesting.
70s, right? Maybe 75, something
I
like that.
in fact, I just looked, I looked it up, 74, yes.
There we go. Same year as Exorcist, or was the
74.
Exorcist 73? Anyway, that period, yeah. The yeah, exact Abby. It's that in that genre, right? The possession film. Um,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
so
Interesting.
really,
Very
so we're looking at, I mean, we stayed in the 70s, even though we were going to move forward, and we referenced some stuff, um,
mhm.
but just really, just continuing to try to fill in some holes from last week, I guess, and other parts of other aspects of the reform and the reaction, and
Mhm.
those films we're talking about, particularly the horror films,
Yes. Yes.
and these films of the occult are very much, along with the sexual liberation stuff, right? What the Christian right, in particular, the religious right, but especially the Christian right,
Mm-hmm.
Whether that is the Catholic Christian right or the
Mm-hmm.
Protestant Christian right. This is
Mm-hmm.
what they're reacting to specifically in the culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they see as the promotion of the demonic, right? The satanic
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in the culture, right? Um,
Yes. And right, which and when it comes back to um Angel Heart in the
mhm.
90s, the mid
Yep,
90s.
80s,
It
Angel
was the
Heart.
80s Angel Heart? Okay.
Yep, because I was still in San Francisco State, so it might
Okay.
have been 88.
It's the same trope, the
Yep.
same thing, right? Um, but now with a critique. There's some kind of discursive critique about the demonizing of African religion,
Mhm,
you know, uh,
mhm,
African spirituality, African, practices, because there's, enough has been information and under common information
mhm.
has been cultivated so that a voice can read and say, you know what?
Right, so it's interesting.
Yeah.
That's right. Uh, because before that movie comes out, um, what's the Angel Heart comes out in the late 80s, right? I think 88, thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right around 80, 86.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what was that movie called? The Believers comes out,
Right. Oh,
right?
believers. Yes.
Yeah.
I remember the believers. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just so, which is, picking up the old trope, right? It
Yeah.
is demonizing African spirituality, right? I
Yes.
mean, there's sort of like this nod, you think, to respecting the tradition, but ultimately it's not, right? Ultimately, it's demonic, right? It's negative, right? It's not.
Fearsome, fearful.
It's
It's
yes,
a threat. It's this, the and also the threat of the unconscious world, the threat
yeah,
of the right of the
yes,
less than awake, the other than awake, the threat of the
and
invisible.
requires
Yes,
policing, right? Because it's a case, right? It's a criminal case. Yeah,
absolutely. And it made me think about two things with Paul Mooney, that Paul Mooney. Anyway, this whole he has a bit that he does, and one of the punchlines is well, he has voodoo. He's not that great. He's not
right,
groovy.
right,
You tell you, and then they tell you that the brothers made it because he's got some kind of power over inward, some kind of power. So
yeah,
he's
right,
got
right.
voodoo. He's not that great. He's got voodoo. You know that kind of thing. But
I love Paul
hilarious.
Mooney.
He has another. Yes, he has another bit where he said he came across some. Maybe he was in a, antique shop or whatever it was, and he said that he came across these two masks, right? And he
Mhm.
fell to his knees and said, "Oh, help me! Remember the old ways
Mm,
and cast a spell on these." You know,
the reals,
but
Yeah,
we understand that that is a hearty wish.
yeah, yes, exactly.
Don't we know something?
Yeah,
But excuse me. But yeah, the reactionary troops are kept safe and sound.
they're kept safe and
Safe,
sound.
even it with the glamour of reform. And now they
Hmm.
the glamour of reform because even that's too much. It's just like any space
Right.
is too much, and they're not wrong. You know what I
What do you
mean?
mean?
Almost not wrong. That in order to um that in order for that the white supremacist order to be maintained, there has to be a rigidity, there has to be an
Mhm.
apartheid, there has to be this kind of, what I'm saying, when the creepers, what I'm saying, when there is a any kind of sharing of that space diminishes, even as it's promoting the, even if it's still in the name of Westernness. You know what I mean? Or in idealization of Westernness. Um, I think it still diminishes, diminishes the power effect. That's what I meant because you
They
said
have
what?
to control the ideas. That's what you're
Yes, and in order to, yes, there has to be a space where uh, you know
or that's to say
power.
they're right that they have to control these ideas.
Yes, that's what I mean.
That's
Yes,
what
that's what I mean.
yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean. You know that if if any space is too much space.
Any space, right? Any space is too, which again, reform these reactionaries, right?
Mhm.
Reform, it has been too much, and the reformers only want to reform, right? They were going to, they limit, right? They have a line they will not go beyond, at which point they will ally with and facilitate the reactionaries, because they will not give space for revolution, because they do not want to give up their monopoly on property, power, control, etc. Right, and the ideas, and so the ideas that generate those things, and so things get through. Right,
Yeah.
we talked about the spook who sat by the door is one of those things that got through, and there are other things that got through. I've always thought that I think of the film from the 1970s, The Boys in Company C, as that way, right? Something that
Mhm.
got through in a way. Um, a Vietnam story that looks
Apocalypse
at
Now.
the,
What are
and I
your
always
thoughts
think of
about?
Apocalypse Now in that way, right? And I actually like the Redux also, and really, in its own way, things get through. I had another example in mind that has gotten away from me, but will probably. Oh yeah, at the end, or actually the very early '80s, very long film by Warren Beatty, Reds, um,
Mhm.
which is at least interesting, right? At least takes American communist and the communist revolution in Russia seriously, right?
Hmm.
At the very
Mhm.
least, right?
Mhm.
Um, and without ignoring contradictions, etc.
Mhm.
Um, you know, uh, things make their way through. Things
Mhm.
become, um, things live underground lives in
Mhm.
its own way. The Rocky Horror Picture Show, right, is certainly culturally subversive. I mean,
Absolutely
is it
right.
challenging the economic relations of the society? Maybe somebody's done a reading like that. I don't know. But it at least, is challenging all of the various gender norms and
Yeah.
um, um,
Yeah.
that, right? The hetero normativity, right, is
Yeah. Yeah.
challenged again in the mid '70s, and
Yeah.
continues to live a life for those who feel different for
Mhm.
whatever reason, right?
Mhm.
Um, or
Mhm.
just like, I wonder though, right? But again, that so it's sort of, it leans into the sexual revolution part, but that
Yes.
it nonetheless, I think served a subversive role in challenging those norms, right?
Mhm.
At
Mhm.
least getting people in the audience to think differently about those norms, right? And if you can chip away at one area, you can begin
Mhm.
chipping away at other areas, or at least asking people to reflect on why do you believe what you believe,
Mhm.
and which again is very much what this reaction is about.
Mhm.
So, um, in this last little section here, is it's we've been at it for like an hour and 40. Um,
Yes.
let's look at what you brought up at the end of the night last week. What might we expect in terms of cultural production in this moment of reaction? And again, it's always it is hard to say. Sometimes when I look back to the '80s and I think about all of the kind of very the Reagan-esque feel of a lot of the stuff that came out, I sometimes I forget. Oh yeah, these other things came out, right, that were clearly oppositional. Oh, I can't remember the name of the film. It's on the tip of my tongue, but I do remember the lead actor was Emilio Estevez. Gosh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. Um,
Mm-hmm.
where and
Mm-hmm.
again, based on a true story, where he and his girlfriend in the Midwest are robbing banks and giving that money to farmers to give back to the banks to pay their
Oh,
bills.
wow.
I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember, and it's based on a true story. I cannot. I'm drawing. It's like on the tip of my tongue.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Emilio Estevez. So there was that. There was even the very corny but very good, very fun movie, but actually makes a political statement. John Carpenter, one of these kind of outsiders, not necessarily revolutionary, but interesting point of view. They Live, right? Everybody remember They Live? Put on the glasses so you can see the aliens who are, running society.
Yes.
Standing in for the billionaires, oligarchs, and their lackeys.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other films, right? There were these oppositional things that came out, right, during
Mm-hmm.
that period, and not just mainstream films, right, or B movies from the.
Mm-hmm.
So what about now? This is what I'm trying to get to. What about now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What could
Mm-hmm.
we expect? And as you mentioned last week, one of the things I expected was, or expect, and it seems to be playing out in some ways, is the reemergence, right, or the reassertion, I should say, of country music as um, the most representative, the truly American music, so to speak, right? The music that represents, again, the real Americans, the heartland, the all that,
Mm-hmm.
despite the diversity within country music.
Music.
Because after all, we saw the last time that was kind of the condition under the Bush years. The Dixie Chicks spoke up and were, on the outside of that world in some ways suddenly.
Right.
And they themselves then changed their names to the Chicks very recently, 2020, to not even honor Dixie, right, in the wake of the 2020 uprisings. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's already some of that we see, right? A reassertion of country music, and ain't nobody hating on country music, right? Because
Mm-mm.
good music is
That's the
good
point.
music. But
Mm-hmm.
what what does it what does it symbolize for people,
Symbolize. Yes.
right? What
Mm-hmm.
has it been made to symbolize, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, country music, and I guess we could say even still, although I think that's been buried, it has its whole history of like the outlaw, right? Johnny
Right.
Cash and Merle
Right.
Haggard and them,
Right.
right? And
Right.
Willie Nelson, right?
Right.
Still doing it.
Right.
Chris Christopherson, right?
Right.
Is not going
It's what it
along.
represents. And
It's
again, very much through the culture industry, creating the common
through the
sense,
culture industry. That's right. And
the
then you get
association.
um,
Mhm.
individuals like Beyonce doing a country album,
Exactly. Yeah.
gives it another kind of legitimacy, even though she comes from people who are always illegitimate
Mm-hmm.
in the cultural scope, the symbolic world of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I know one of the most popular country stars right now is Shabuzi, a brother, locked
Mm-hmm.
up. The
Mm-hmm.
And even that, what was really kind of one of the first. What was the first hit by what's his name? I just went blank on his name. Um, he did it with Billy Ray Cyrus, Country Road or something like that. Oh man,
Okay.
uh, I'm so mad at myself. I can, he, I can't think of his name. The young brother all openly gay. Did
Okay.
some commercials with Elton John not
Okay.
that long ago. I
Uh,
think it's a little somebody. I can't. Anyway, I don't want to get stuck on him. So
uh,
we've had a couple of years already, right? And maybe this is because we've had Trump before, just 4 years ago.
uh-huh.
And so there was already this trend that I expect really kind of a double down, because the Western, right? The popularity of the Yellowstone series, for example, that continues to be popular, has done a couple of prequels. I
Mm-hmm.
think currently has a prequel going. And then Costner leaves the show and does this film that came out last summer, Horizon, part one and part two. So, really, two films. So, what
Mm-hmm.
else might we see? Especially with almost the immediate takeover of the Kennedy Center by Trump and his placing of Trump, of his people on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think Lee Greenwood, what is it? I'm proud to be an American. That guy, country singer, might be
Mm-hmm.
the new director, artistic director, something. Or I know he's on the board, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what kind of shows are going to be now going to be programmed at the Kennedy Center? And there's already been this call for quote unquote patriotic education.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's certainly going to be a call for patriotic art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the arch conservative Mel Gibson, I believe, like his father, from one of the most retrograde um, versions of Catholicism um,
Mm-hmm.
in Australia and other places,
Mm-hmm.
is now the quote unquote ambassador to Hollywood. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
even this call to put tariffs on foreign films, apparently on the suggestion of conservative actor John Voight.
Hmm.
Um, but again, because of the war on ideas,
Mm-hmm.
the American right has forever, interestingly, right, had a hatred for European modernism, European modernity, European leftism. So they
Mm-hmm.
want to hold up the
Mm-hmm.
Western tradition, which is
No,
all about Europe, right, and
not
Western
that
Europe
part.
in particular, but not that part, not modern Europe, right, not the ideas of modern Europe, and a lot of the arch conservative, the reactionaries in Europe, they want to go back to a
Right.
pre-democratic Europe, right? They want to go back to some sort of feudal. There are still royalists in France,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
England is still a constitutional monarchy, as is Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Spain, others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they love, um, well, they're hoping, right? Because actually, this isn't really, I don't know if this is happening in Europe. Um, you know, there's even for some of them a return from Protestantism to the Catholic Church, because hey, that's the Western tradition, right? And it's through this Protestantism, and there's some truth in this, right? In some ways, the atheism of modernity, and especially late modernity, the popularity of atheism, which really still ain't that popular. What are we talking? In the world of believers, but it's certainly
Mm-hmm.
more than it was. They as the historian and pastor John Hamer puts it, um,
Mm-hmm.
atheism is one of the logical conclusions of Protestantism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a further moving away from church and the spiritual, again, as that organizing principle, right? I mean, it's the logical end of secularism. Um, and so they hate that, right? And so this is very much what they're why they are reactionaries, what they're reacting against.
Hmm.
They do not want an empowered working class,
Mm.
empowered peasants, actual democratic rule. They want hierarchy. They want to continue hierarchy. They want to continue private property relations. They want to continue to suck us all dry, right? How Bob put it, the Babylon system is the vampire, sucking the blood of the sufferers.
Mm.
That they want to keep doing that, right? That's what they want.
Yes,
That's what they want. Um,
that's all.
yeah, they
And
want
when
to
you
keep doing that.
make it simple like that, put it in simple terms, the patterns are easy to see, kind of clear
Mm-hmm,
terms. Okay,
mm-hmm,
here's a
mm-hmm.
way of thinking about it. Okay, I see the fit, I see the pattern, see the carryover.
See the
I
care.
see
So
the
we can expect those kinds of. Well, I'm wondering, right? I think they're already there because I
okay.
always thought it was. I mean, I loved it. I'm not, it's so often these things are so well made, they're good, they're entertaining, right? But I
Yeah.
still always thought it's so. What's the word I'm looking for? Paradoxical, oxymoronic. I mean, really, I'm going to jump back. I always thought it was weird, just going back to like to 1980 or 81 or whenever it was, the U.S. obsession with the British royalty.
Yes.
I'm like, why do you guys care who's getting married, right? Don't you understand what the whole revolution was about? And this thing you call a revolution, overturning the monarchy, or at least saying, hey, but this obsession, right? But then now I'm gonna jump up some decades. I always thought it was the popularity of Game of Thrones, right? This feudal world, this world of kings and queens, and bending the knee. And now that language is used in politics, right? Everyone, are you bending the knee to Trump, right? But now that has become part of the language. And
Wow.
then again, with the Dune series, which was already in the novels in the 70s. But I always thought, well, why? What is this imagination of the human future that
Yes.
returns to a feudal system and an emperor? Um,
Huh.
and why? And how is it that these become popular? And even I'm wearing one of my Tolkien T-shirts, right, and my Elvish T-shirt. But I
Mm-hmm.
always want, as again, someone who's loved reading the Tolkien stories since middle school.
Yeah.
But it's monarchist, right? It's royalist.
Yes.
It's magical in its thinking, right? It's
Yeah.
and even this notion of like distinct races with
Right.
different qualities.
Right.
And these have a popularity now, um, very different from say the Star Trek thing, right? Where Star Trek imagines a federation of planets that's essentially a socialist democracy or a democratic socialist, organization of the Federation, um,
Mm.
essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very different. And even the Star Wars, trilogy, right? It's opposing, an authoritarian galactic empire. Um, not the idea is not to reproduce hierarchy. And even the Jedi Knights, right, are essentially supposed to be servants of people, and keepers of order, but not abusers of power, right? Um, anyway, uh, now there's this popularity going back again, to the first Trump uh, presidency, the first Trump administration, of the popularity of the feudal, right, or at least an imagination of the feudal,
Mm-hmm.
and the hierarchical, and
Mm-hmm.
the casual use of cruelty and brutality,
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
as a tool of power, right?
Right. Right. And we are coming upon 9 o'clock. But it made me think about the 60s and 70s seemed to have, if there was a fascination, it was with the quote unquote prehistoric. It was with
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
with
Yeah.
early quote unquote early man, with,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, and the uh early man, and various things that made
Mhm.
it in, in this imagination, in various expressions of it,
Yes.
from a, you know um a what is it, the purity. I'm not trying to say noble savage. I'm not trying to,
Right. Re re
but
re reproduce that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, yeah, speak that, but or refer to that, you know what I'm saying? But the notion of the a pure the purity, and kind of this effusive gentleness, and all of the, best qualities of humankind are
Right.
found in the kind of romanticization,
Yeah.
um, and to the contrary, this kind of uh, brutish, you know, uh, con- confinement,
Yeah.
uh, kind of a piece. But anyway, they were that, that was definitely a, an impression from the time. Um, and yes, but definitely more relevant to the now, the fascination with the feudal is where it's at, dude, is where it's at.
Hierarchical. So
Yeah.
maybe what we'll see, and I'm curious what you think. Maybe we'll see some, maybe we'll see some more of these kind of medieval type set
Hmm.
movies,
Hmm.
series perhaps. And of course,
Hmm.
since childhood, I have always liked period pieces,
Hmm.
sword and sandal,
Hmm.
type movies,
Yeah.
um,
Me too. Any
wherever
kind.
they might be
Right.
located, doesn't
Period.
matter.
Anywhere. Hmm.
But I'm wondering, will we start getting, say, some Roman Empire movies?
I was
Right?
Yes, you took the words out of my mouth. Roman
And of
Empire
course, that
movie.
that
That
goes well with the biblical often.
absolutely. And it right, there's so much that collapses into that.
Yeah.
Western tradition, uh
Yep.
gratuitous brutality, might making right, uh
Hmm.
the cultural crossroads of various communities.
Hmm.
These empires were absorbed by successive groups of rulers, who now absorb and take over the empire and do with it what they will, this collected
Hmm.
lands. So there's an opportunity, something that I do see in that opportunity, or in that genre, see more in that genre, is probably at least at the beginning, more representation of the various peoples that are, what I'm saying, as a kind of what is the word? Not a nod to, I really mean a uh the kind of trick escapes me, right? But just like, the Gladiator 2 was very popular. The Denzel Washington character, very,
Hmm.
you know. Um, I saw a commercial the other day where there was a Roman arena, and they had an African character in the, I don't know what those areas are called, but the places where the rich people sit, you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying?
Hmm.
An African character in something that looked like an agbada, looked more like a, traditional Nigerian clothing kind of a piece. You know what I'm saying? So
Hmm. Hmm.
representative African. So more
Hmm.
of um a projection of the colonized peoples in positions of equity and,
Yeah.
equality in the wealthy
In the
class,
elites, among the elites.
among
Yes.
the elites. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Mhm. That's
probably
interesting.
that being a feature.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I wonder how, yeah, it'll be interesting because, of course, there were some complaints about Denzel, right?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
'cause
Well,
there's
then they can
always
say
complaints
everything.
because, there's the notion, right, of they're tired of seeing black people or other people in these, that regardless of the history that is documented, right, of particularly of Africans through in the Mediterranean world, both sides and both every part of the Mediterranean. Yeah, there's so that's what I'm wondering if we're going to see a little less of the multicultural casting
It
because of
absolutely
the
makes sense.
so-called what I don't know if you've heard people using the term the last few days, so-called white folks black fatigue. They're
Uh,
tired of seeing us in
oh,
period.
everywhere. Just
Um,
oh yeah,
so
I heard.
this again, and I like the way this one TikToker put it. Um, I think her channel, and she's on YouTube. Her channel's I think called Permaculture. So here he is, another, here we go again, right? White individuals taking a black term and twisting its meaning. Where a sister wrote a book, Black Fatigue, about how exhausting it is having to live in a white supremacist
Oh,
society.
I didn't know that. I know that was the reference.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's the original reference, right?
Right.
How the fatigue we feel in a white
Yes.
controlled world
Yes. Hmm.
now being repurposed as white people's fatigue of having to deal with us.
Right.
Still
Right.
live in the world with us ultimately, right? Which again, in this moment, where they are, where the reactionary right, um, and the white Christian nationalist right and the militant white supremacist right is feeling empowered and emboldened. Um, those are words not to be taken lightly, right? Some
Hmm.
white woman expressing black fatigue. And
Hmm.
though she's certainly been clowned for it, there's
Oh,
a energized sector of society. And in fact, no, I'm mixing her up. That's in the wake of the woman, and indeed, she might have, she, I think she posted this black fatigue monologue in response and perhaps a kind of defense of the white woman who's called the 5-year-old child by the N word.
uh-huh.
And then, all this money starts pouring into her,
Yeah.
so she can defend herself type stuff.
Yeah.
That, that was just an expression of black fatigue, when she called
Yeah.
that child, and then the child's,
Well,
the
yeah.
adult ending,
Yeah.
out of, so, not to be taken lightly, if
No.
these folks are feeling energized. Um, but
And
because of that, I'm wondering if we're going to see a little less of some of that kind of casting.
actually, yes, I actually think that that is uh more accurate, specifically, or a more likely prediction, specifically because multiculturalism itself is is under direct attack, and that will
It's
become
under
more
direct
and
attack.
more. And the DEI uh, card has already been played. All of that. So
Exactly.
more than creating they're not feeling like they need to create any comfort zones or any
Right.
kind of escape
Right.
zones, escape hatches. um but yeah, just in terms of, and we're 4 minutes after 9 and we're getting ready to be done, but the in terms of that black fatigue
Excuse
part,
me.
um I think that we'll see more and more, you know what I'm saying, as the uh rules
Mhm.
the rules, and I'm literally thinking about legalities, um reshape themselves around uh white impunity for anti
Mhm.
uh black and anti people of color violence. They reshape themselves around the rules of white supremacies, of the white
Yeah.
very kinds of just reclaim that. That I think that you'll see a very fast that whites will be very fast to adopt
Yeah.
these attitudes and to try those out, even those who haven't, who only have heard the lore, you know, have perhaps only heard the lore from the grandparents, or what have you. But as in terms of that, what did they say that they said it was Reagan who made it okay to be, and it was a
Yep.
anti-racist
Racist again.
person,
Yeah.
woman of European descent, that said,
Yes,
right?
that was I always get these two mixed up. Um, Rosalind Carter, uh,
Okay.
the former
Okay.
first lady,
Okay. Made it okay.
upon the death of Ronald Reagan, as people were praising him. That was her.
Comfortable comfortable with her racism again,
And that
right?
was 1980 that he was elected.
Right. Absolutely. And so it's taken some time because that there absolutely was moral conviction that was part of those folk who were part of the group of folks, the non-African folks and the European descent folks who were putting their life on the line to
Yeah.
fight, you know what I'm saying? There's absolute conviction, and then there was also a whole lot through the common sense making of the cultural industry and the television industry of a conventional ethic of,
Yeah.
again, that racism as a personal piety issue, or as a
Right.
personal, kind of
It's
stuff.
only interpersonal.
Right. It's an interpersonal issue. And so how do you deal with, but the bases of the discomforts, haven't really been uprooted, and there hasn't been such a deep integration of groups and such a deep familiarity. You know what I'm saying? That there's not plenty of kindling
Right.
available to reignite that odium, to
Yeah.
reignite that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
Black fatigue. Their music they're too loud. The music is too loud. Whatever the zone of conflict, of cultural conflict,
And
may
it's always a corrupting influence, right? Rock and
it's a
roll, jazz was a corrupting influence.
their
Rock and roll,
dances
corrupting
for
influence.
all the same reasons, and for
Hip
all the
hop becomes the corrupting influence.
and the rappers are all gangsters, and what are they saying? And it's not poetry. We can stop pretending we like it, and we can stop pretending that this stuff has any value, and these histories, the ethnic cheerleading, but they're making up these stories about blackness, and we can just stop pretending that it's okay. It's okay to stop pretending that that's okay. And I mean, I am I'm a white woman. I don't have any apologies for that. I don't have any, Europe is, it's okay. I mean, we could do a little leading ourselves, right? Because, Europe has brought the world kind of everything that it has today. So, I mean, we don't have to like carry this kind of, and I'm absolutely not engaging in any white guilt because, I had nothing to do with slavery. I had no, all of the popular
All of the things. Yeah.
all of the things,
Yeah.
can we can exhale and be
We'll
there
see.
open.
We'll see what the cultural, because there's always a
Yeah,
lag, right? I mean, a
there'll be
lot of the movies that are
yeah,
coming out now, they were being made in 24, right?
yeah,
Sometimes movies are made, they were made 2 years ago and they aren't released until.
yeah, 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 yeah. So we'll see.
So we'll see the shift though. I mean, we're still, movies coming out now. We're still being made last year, or so we'll see, right? We'll see over the next year, end of the year, beginning of next year. What are the trends going to be, right? How are the culture industries going to react?
More welfare queens. They're going to bring back welfare queens. More of that in the, I think in the television diet, mental diet, will reappear on cop shows. They haven't been as prevalent. You know what I mean? They had their heyday, and probably see more of that kind of notion. Go ahead. Just
More pathology.
me.
So we'll see,
Yeah.
but we're gonna wait and see, right?
Yes.
It's more pathology right now. The openly targeted group of people are immigrants, particularly non-white immigrants.
Yes.
Um, so we'll see, right? But at the same time, that the spectacular attack is on immigration from the global south, though I assume that it's still the statistical case that most folks being deported are from African majority countries or African majority descent countries.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But that's not necessarily what we see on, in the news broadly, right? There, right now,
Mhm.
broadly, that person is primarily brown, what
Yeah.
we call him brown skin from Latin America or, the Middle East, perhaps,
Yes.
is what we're primarily seeing. But
Yes.
we also know during this, since, that spectacular, there have been, ongoing attacks on everything associated with blackness, um, in official and unofficial capacities, public and private life. And now this kind of language of black fatigue, we
Mhm.
will see, right, when there
Mhm.
are more open attacks, right? There was already the opportunity taken to arrest Ras Baraka, right? This
Mhm.
black mayor of a majority non-white city,
Mhm.
um, and three, and three congresspersons, two black women and one Cuban American. Uh,
Mhm.
also at least are under threat
Arrest. Yes.
of arrest.
Right.
The So we'll, again, we pay attention,
Mhm.
and see how the attack is going to come. Um, so yeah, that's where we are,
Mhm.
and we're now 12 minutes after. So let's wrap this up because
Yes.
we both need to eat dinner, I would think, or no, I do,
You do.
and
Sure.
and it's already been 2+ hours. So we'll pick it up next week. I mean, there's more culture industry stuff to talk about.
Surely there is. Surely
So we'll
there is.
stick
So,
with the culture industries. Folks, thank you. We've had a couple of viewers tonight.
all right.
Um, Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Again, we want to encourage you to leave comments. Let us know what you think about what we had to say. Maybe you can fill in some of the blanks where, we forgot some names of folks. And, I cannot think of, I still can't think of the young artist's name. Had the little video where he sits on the devil's throne, and I just can't think of it. Right? Oh,
Yes.
this dude, Country Road, whatever. Um,
Okay.
anyway, we want to thank you for watching. Please remember to subscribe. Please remember to like, and please share and leave comments. If you're on Facebook viewing us, you can do the same. We appreciate you. We're trying to make our little contribution in this moment. The Joko right now taking this form as a form of community education.
Right
So
on.
we
Right
need
on.
you to engage.
Yes. Like, subscribe, share, comment, 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 so we can have a real conversation. We need
So we can
con,
have a real conversation.
right?
Exactly. So
Oh,
you want to say good night, Tasha?
good night, Tasha.
Good night, Tasha. And folks,